Over to you. We're here in the background if you need us, but take it away.
Thank you, Marielle. Thank you, Jeff. Yeah, great idea. And I'm Matt Queasley. For those who don't know me, I'm a professional engineer and reserve specialist, but I'm also a board member as well. So I might have to log in on the 11th and share and learn. I'm on a condo board in where I live in Tampa, and of course, my home is where I live and where I'm at today. It is one of the biggest assets that I have, and for a lot of people. We get on our boards to protect that. So kudos to all of you board members joining us today and taking time to learn more about SIRS. This course is going to be really heavily focused on condominium associations in the state of Florida who are now required to do structural integrity reserve studies. And of course, many are done now. The deadline is coming up. So if you haven't done it, that's maybe another discussion. But right now, we're going to kind of focus on, the SIRS is done and now what? The course is a 1 hour course for continuing education for managers. So community association managers will get a CEU in the insurance and financial management area for this. My background is a professional engineer, civil and environmental engineering. I am a reserve specialist with the Community Associations Institute. I'm also on the National Board of Trustees for the Community Associations Institute, and I am a professional reserve analyst as well. All to say, I've been working in this industry for a long time. And again, enjoyed that. I'm very excited to be joined today by Casey, our account manager, who serves these in Orlando and Fort Lauderdale, Miami, West Palm areas. I'm in Tampa and West Florida. She's on the East Coast, and so Casey's here today. I'm going to have her kind of start us off with an introduction, Casey, and then jump into the program.
Thanks, Matt. Yes, I am the account manager with Reserve Advisors for the South and partially Central Florida area. I've been with Reserve Advisors for about 6 months, not too long. I actually came from the construction world, and I didn't really expect the construction world to be so connected to now the condo world, especially after the SIRS requirement took place in Florida. And so just on that note, we'll be talking about the SIRS like Matt said today. Initially on the agenda, we're going to just look at an overview of what SIRS are, how they came about, and some House Bill 913 changes that happened in July of this year, and gonna be highlighting those a little bit to see how it's different now from a couple of years ago when they first initiated. Some reporting requirements and disclosures, and incorporating SIRS into the budgets, which is obviously the whole point of what reduce SIRS, right? To put it into the budget and be able to fund it. We're going to be talking about how you can waive partial fund or any restrictions on reserves, funding strategies, completion of the SIRS, and some case studies. So to start with, like we said, the SIRS are brand new in Florida. So how did they start? They started in couple of years ago, like 4 years ago, right, Matt, with the Champlain Towers collapsing in Surfside, which was in South Florida. That tragedy led the lawmakers into taking a look at the laws that were in place and realizing that those laws were not really favoriting funding reserves because they were not encouraging, boards and condos to fund reserves. Most of the time, a quorum of a small percentage of the ownership could take a vote, and the majority of that quorum could vote to waive reserves completely, and the rest of the ownership had no idea that was happening or didn't have any control over that if they were not present in those meetings. But now, with the Structural Integrity Reserve Study, you are required to fund for those very integral parts of your building, whatever keeps your building healthy and contributes to the longevity of the building. So you have to fund for those items. It's for the maintenance of those items or the replacement of those items, and not commingle with anything else. On the other side, we have the non-structural components, which also now have a higher threshold in waiving those reserves. So it's not as easy to waive reserves for those non-structural components in your building. And of course, now you have to do independent inspections and opinions of professionals, right, that are doing these studies on a day-to-day basis. And it's not just an assumption of maybe, board or managers that are not well equipped in this area to fully understand the nuances of what, construction is and what goes behind the actual replacement costs of these components. So what is structural? In the law, it's written out that these are the items that we're looking for when we're doing a SIRS study. We're looking at the roof, the structural, this is like load-bearing walls, any concrete, that's holding up the building. We're looking at fireproofing and fire protection systems, plumbing, electrical systems, waterproofing and exterior paint, and windows and exterior doors. Now, on top of these that are more sort of black and white, we're also looking at any other item that has a deferred maintenance or replacement cost that exceeds 25,000, which really contributes again to the health of the building. So 25,000 is that minimum requirement, but it kind of needs to be a bit of a informed decision whether or not you would fund a little bit less than this, because this number is just a general number for all condos, whether that condo has 300 units or 15 units. And so maybe a 15 unit condo at $25,000 expense is quite large, and they can't just cough that up, which is maybe the case for a 300 unit building. So as a board, you would need to say, well, maybe I need to fund for anything over 5,000 or 10,000, because that is the threshold where I feel comfortable, having funds for in my budget and in my reserves. And these items kind of need to be determined by your reserve analyst that's coming and doing the study. It could be something like a seawall. It could be a pool, maybe on a roof. It could be retaining walls. Anything that really is not written in the law specifically, but could damage your building and the structure of your building, if it's not included, right? And if it's not fixed in your reserves. And we have
I'll
some
just
more.
add there, yeah, can I just add one item there? This initially was $10,000, which mirrored the prior condo statute, which is still in place actually, that said that reserves had to be established for anything roofing, painting, paving, and anything over $10,000. That threshold was set in 1984, and so $10,000 in 1984 is kind of the equivalent of $25,000 today. So the lawmakers felt that that number could be raised, but I completely echo what Casey said. That may not be appropriate for all associations. Where I live in a smaller community, $24,000 expense would really blow our whole maintenance budget for the year. So we've chosen to do a threshold of 5,000, and everything over 5,000 we reserve for. Under 5,000 we handle as operating maintenance. And then there's that little note as well that the division now is going to be required to post by February, I believe, an updated amount that'll just be adjusted for inflation, so that number keeps up with inflation. But again, that's the minimum standard. We believe you can go more aggressive than that if you have to, which feels like a good place to say that, Casey and I are not attorneys. No one on this presentation is attorneys, and this is not legal advice. We're going to share with you what the statutes say. We're going to share with you what we've heard as legal interpretations on this and how we're seeing it implemented, how our engineering team is applying the requirements. But please don't take this as specific legal advice, and consult your attorney if there is a specific question pertaining to your association. Sorry, Casey, take it away. Go to the next slide.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Matt. And then we also are looking at what is not included. So what is not considered a structural item? This is not to say that we're not going to fund for these, right? I mean, these would go in your non-structural bucket, right? You would not commingle these items with your structural items that we just mentioned, but we always are recommending you funding for these, right? And we're looking at elevators, for example. Elevators are a pretty expensive item to replace or fix. And so it's good to fund for those, but they would not be commingled with your structural items. And then we have HVAC, finishes, fixtures, right? Furniture. We have pavement, lighting. A pool on, the ground floor would be another great example, right? Any equipment that the community has, courts, and the list goes on and on. Basically, anything that's not immediately affecting the structure of your building and the health of your building.
Yeah, and that leads there are a couple questions I'll answer that because they pertain to this particular slide. one, Debbie asks, why are non-attached carports included in the funding requirements? You'll see them on this list. They're not, we don't believe in them unless they were 3-story residential structures, that they would be needed to be included as a SIRS requirement. But keep in mind, there is still the funding for non-SIRS items. So there is still a requirement for all condos, regardless of height, in the state of Florida, reserved for roofing, painting, paving, and everything else now over $25,000 that would need repair or replacement. So there's still a requirement to fund them, although funding for those non-structural items can still be waived with a majority of the voting interests. And so that kind of addresses, hopefully, Debbie, your question. And then there was another one that I'll answer live as well about elevators. Why Maria asked, what about elevators? Are these safety issues? Certainly, they certainly could be safety issues, as good drainage items or even security equipment. All of those could be safety issues. But the purpose of the structural integrity reserve study is not to identify a comprehensive list of safety issues or code issues. It is to identify the structural issues there. So elevators again fall into that other category. We would call them non-structural reserves. I've heard some providers call them waivable reserves. General reserves would be another name for them. But these items are should be included in your reserve schedule, but not in your structural integrity reserve study. So I think it's important to draw that distinction. There's a lot of confusion there. Sorry, Casey, I think that kind of covers this slide. If you want to go to the next one.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is just a quick map of states that have either already had some funding requirements. Like the West Coast has always had funding and reserve study requirements, and they've always sort of been ahead of the game with this. And then, of course, Florida saw a lot of changes since 2021 when the collapse happened, but then other states followed ship. So we see Tennessee, Maryland, and Jersey have also incorporated some laws into their reserve study world and condo world. And then you have states with no requirements, or they'll have some statutory guidelines. And I don't know, Matt, if you have any more input on other states here and what they do.
Just that there's a definite discussion at a lot of states about what to do here, as you kind of touched on an earlier slide. The reinspection program of buildings is gotten a lot of attention lately. In fact, the NIST, the National Institute of Safety and Technology's investigation is still ongoing onto the Champlain Tower South, and they will likely make some recommendations as well on what should be done. And can't say for sure. They haven't come out with their final findings yet, but their preliminary findings indicate that they're looking into ways, and one of their charges is to identify ways to improve standards, practices, requirements. And so we probably will continue to see either legislation or just general practices, maybe codes put in place to enact more of what we're seeing in Florida, and that is ensuring that our buildings are in financial health and have financial and physical health.
So we're going to talk a little bit about who needs a SIRS. We've briefly mentioned it while talking during this presentation, but the term habitable story sort of came about this year. And what that really means is a story or floor in a building that is used for living, sleeping, eating, and cooking. So basically anywhere that you would conduct like your day and sort of go on with your day, or you would be in for a very long time. And so that kind of came as to kind of replace the previous law, which said 3 stories, but now it's 3 habitable stories. So a building with 2 stories on top where people have units and live, and maybe a garage on the first floor would not need a SIRS in this case. So that was the major change that happened this summer in the law update. And then single family, 2 family, and 3 family dwellings were always excluded, but now 4 family dwellings were added as well. And again, we're looking at 3 or fewer habitable stories here as well. Any portion or component of a building that has not been submitted to the condominium form of ownership. And the second and third point, I think, connect a bit because the third point would say any portion of the building that is maintained by another party. And this would be something like, part of a building would be like a hotel or something like that, and then part of it would be a condo. Is that right, Matt? Would that be a
Yeah,
good
a lot of
example?
mixed use buildings, only
Hmm.
the residential condo portion
Hmm.
is
Perfect.
included.
And what is included in your report? So when you get your report, this is sort of what you would look for. We're going to take a look at the remaining useful life or estimated remaining useful life and replacement or deferred maintenance cost of each item. Those items that we mentioned already, like the roof, the structure, everything. It may exclude items that have that useful life, end of useful life after 25-year period. And you may also see deferred maintenance instead of replacement cost. And there are certain items that you would not completely strip and replace, even if they are part of your structural integrity, like maybe concrete restoration. Like you wouldn't go and demolish the entire concrete and put new concrete. You would just do replacements and you would do maintenance on it. And that's still a pretty high dollar item. And so you would put that into your reserves and you would fund for that instead of a full replacement. You want to take over here, Matt?
Yeah. So who conducts the SIRS and I say SIRS, it's Structural Integrity Reserve Study. We just kind of use that. Some say SEERS, although I don't know that I'm more of a team SIRS than a team SEERS, but that's just my preference. But SIRS, who conducts it? So initially it was Florida engineers, PEs, licensed Florida engineers, or licensed architects. And this law has evolved, as you mentioned. This is like we just had a 913 went signed in this July, House Bill 913. Now that's kind of they're calling it Condo 4.0, but it's the it's the fourth version of the law. Each time some changes are being made. So, but in the second version, they realized quickly, there may not be enough engineers that do this work and architects, and that reserve specialists and professional reserve analysts are already folks that have credentials and focus on these reserve studies. And so they expanded the capabilities of people with those credentials as well. We did see a large increase in companies that provide these structural integrity reserve studies. The initial concern was there wouldn't be enough of all four of those organizations to get these studies done for all the communities that needed them in Florida. There are tens of thousands of communities that needed them, and I'm happy to report that many have done that. I think that a majority, I would venture to say a majority, especially of a great majority of those that are professionally managed and have either independent or companies managing them have gotten the word out and completed their structural integrity reserve studies. But there are companies, some of them that got into the reserve study as an additional service because they maybe do concrete restoration or coatings, and so that caught the attention of the legislature this year. And they wanted to make sure that desire to intent to bid on the services that come from these reserve studies was disclosed. So now that the intent to bid on any services must be disclosed at the time of proposing a structural integrity reserve study. My advice is always just to keep an arm's length between the people that are reporting and kind of setting your reserves and your budget from those that actually do the work. But there may be reasons to use someone that does both. Just make sure that just is disclosed to everyone. And again, as a board member, I like to keep arm's length because I don't want there to be any claim of a potential conflict of interest. Even if there is no conflict of interest and the advice is absolutely appropriate, having someone that would financially benefit from a concrete restoration project, say, be the one that sets the budget for that concrete restoration project, could draw the attention of an unhappy member in your community or cause some issues for the board. So I always encourage that separation, but now it is now required to at least disclose any potential conflict of interest or intent to bid on services. The deadline to complete the SIRS was extended this past year to December 31st of 2025. So I guess we've got 29 short days left in the year to get this done for buildings that were existing on or before July 1 of 2022. Uh, After, if the building was existing, came into existence after July 1 of 2022, when the first law went into place, then it's every 10 years at turnover, and then every 10 years thereafter. There are a couple of delay options on there. One is that the milestone inspection is due on or before December 1st of next year, that they can coordinate the SIRS with the milestone inspection. So some of those um, were coordinated, the milestone inspection, which we're not going to talk a lot about today, but it was another inspection that was put into place in 2022 after the collapse of the building. And those two can be coordinated. And then this year, what they heard a lot of, and when I say they, the lawmakers and their staff and the folks that do the policies heard that, a lot of communities had kind of were feeling a double hit from the milestone inspection requirements. We saw dozens of buildings, getting essentially red tagged or having really significant safety issues in the buildings. And so they had to address immediate near-term safety issues, and which cost a lot of money. And then at the same time, saving for items that might have significant remaining useful life on them, and kind of doing both at one time. So in 913, even though most, like I said, have already completed their SIRS, now there's a requirement that the SIRS can be delayed for up to 2 consecutive budget years immediately following the milestone inspection. So there's a couple of options of why you wouldn't have it done by the December 31st of this year, but most communities are going to need to have it done by in the next 29 days. And you can move on there, Casey. So then the reporting requirements, and this has been a big question since the beginning. We have the requirements. How are we going to, what reporting is needed? And so initially it was, the sellers of a the buyers of a new community and lessees in a community had to get a copy of it. Well, they also said, well, now the association, the members of the association should also receive a copy. So 2 years ago, I believe they added the requirement that within 45 days after completion of the report, the association must distribute a copy to each owner, and you can send it electronically or make it available for inspection, but they have to receive a notice that it's available. Also, within 45 days of its completion, the association must provide the division with a statement indicating that it was completed. Just this year now, there's another requirement that an officer or a director must also sign an affidavit acknowledging receipt of the completed SIRS. So if you had the SIRS done a couple of years ago, this new requirement may apply to you. I've heard some different interpretations on that. It's not too much trouble. I'm happy to provide a sample affidavit if you'd like. I know the state's putting one together as well that can be used just to sign that you have received it and have distributed it to your members. The idea here is they want to make sure that it's being transferred and being done and transferred to the people that need it and benefit from it. The division then must compile and share essentially a list of all the SIRS that have been completed by September 30th of the fiscal year. And so we'll show that. They've got that up and running now. And just a note that the SIRS is an official record and must be maintained for 15 years after the study is completed. The next website is a new, or the next slide is just drawing attention to a new website that the Florida Division, the Department of Business and Professional Regulation, Division of Condominiums, Mobile Homes, and Timeshares has created. And it's a simple URL, condos.myfloridalicense.com. The DBPR's overall website is myfloridalicense.com, so they just put condos in front of it, and you'll see a lot of great information on here about the various milestone reserve studies, structural integrity reserve study inspections, their requirements, the about education, about your online account. You submit your statement to the division here through your online account. If you have a complaint about a community, make it very easy to file here as well with links there. So that's one we've been bookmarking. Encourage you to probably do the same if you're managing or living and board member of a condo. It does get updated. It has been updated a few times with new information. And this is further into that. So I highlighted the URL there, the condos.myfloridalicense.com. Under the SIRS inspection, there's instructions for how to report your SIRS to the division. So if you have not done this, I would encourage you to do it right away. If you haven't got your report, you've got 45 days to submit this statement. Also, and kind of unrelated to SIRS, all condominium and cooperatives are required to create an online account by October 1st of 2025. So that deadline is passed. So if you haven't done that, there's a link to do that as well. So some really helpful information on there. I highlighted one of you can see, go back for 1 second, Casey. I just wanted to show on the structural integrity form there. You can see there's like 9 different sections with a number of different questions there. And so some of that information is going to be about your specific association, and some is going to be about the report itself. At the end of this summary, it says, here's here, attach a copy of your SIRS report here. I just want to point out, you see those little red stars that are next to these questions on general information? Those are required information. The submission of the report itself is not a required piece of information. It's optional. You certainly can submit it, but I've had a lot of communities have concerns about submitting the report, or the file is too big, or how do I do this? And just want to be clear that that's not a required field. It's something the division would like to have a copy of, but is not. You don't have to submit that. If the division is involved in an investigation with your association, they have a right to get that information. They can request it, but just as a normal matter of practice, without an investigation, there's no need to resubmit the report. But they do want to know who completed it. They want to know the license number, certification number of the person that completed it, and whether it was an engineer, architect, reserve specialist, or professional reserve analyst. Then that information is what we're showing on the next page. This is just a clip of some buildings. I just did a screenshot of the database, but here is a database again that's accessible to the public, where you can see who has submitted their structural integrity report. So this can be viewed by an owner in your community, a potential buyer in your community, a realtor that's looking to sell or purchase a unit in your community. It can be viewed by a bank or a mortgage company, all of which is, again, in the spirit of transparency, important for the state to maintain this list. And then, primarily, I think one of the, and there are communities out there, talking with some, still don't feel that anybody's going to know if they didn't submit it. There's no master list, and what's the state going to do is some of the mentality that boards have. I'm sure none of you that are on here getting this education have that mentality, but maybe you've heard people say that. I think the biggest teeth, of course, the division can fine associations. They can cite you. They can go and request documents. They can cause things to happen. But the industry will also respond. So there's now specific disclosures on any sale contract or lease of a condominium that is required, that is entered into after December 31st of last year. So all contracts now, essentially in conspicuous type, stating that the SIRS has been completed or not, and then the buyer or leaser is able to get a copy, or should be able to receive a copy of the report itself. And a contract that does not have that is voidable prior to the closing. So this, again, if a mortgage company does their homework, and we know they're doing a lot more looking into communities now, they can decide not to put a mortgage on a community that doesn't have a SIRS. There is a blacklist of communities. Some of you may have heard of this. Fannie Mae and has a list of communities that essentially are not meeting their requirements, underwriting requirements. And so if you find yourself on that blacklist for a variety of reasons, it could be because of the reserve reporting, it could be because of insurance requirements or reports of structural issues. There's a number of factors there that can make it very difficult to sell a unit in your building if a mortgage is involved. So that eliminates maybe a big portion of buyers, which is of course not what we want to do as boards. We want our job, as difficult as it can be, is to protect the investment and make sure that people are getting the most value, I think, that they can from their homes and their community associations. Now incorporating into the budgets, this gets a little technical here, but the association if they're required to have a SIRS, and now again, there's some that were required because it was 3 stories initially. Now it's 3 habitable stories. So there's some that are no longer required to have a SIRS, but if they were required to have a SIRS, then the budget reserve amounts in their budget must be based on the findings and recommendations of the most recent SIRS. Even though they moved the deadline of completion of the SIRS to December 31st of this year, they did not change this requirement. So this brings up a situation where a building maybe doesn't have their SIRS in hand yet, but had to pass a budget for this. The requirement still says that the reserve amounts must be based on the findings of the most recent SIRS. I'm not sure how that's reconciled. I would encourage you to talk with your attorney if you find yourself in that situation. But regardless, even in budgets that haven't had their SIRS, they cannot waive funding with the exception of a few items if it was for those specific items that Casey showed earlier that are considered structural. General or non-structural reserves can still be based on board estimates. They don't have to be based on professionals. Best practice is absolutely to request a professional analysis of those items, because there's some big dollar items on there, and boards, managers too, are not really expected to be masters of construction costs and material rates and labor rates and to get that information there. So encourage you as board member to shift that liability and hire a professional, but that's not required for the non-structural items, just a best practice. Now, sorry, stay on that slide for just a minute longer, Casey. Back to what I said earlier about some of the feedback that the legislatures got was, that this is a incredible financial burden to fund the SIRS, and so they wanted to show this year some relief to communities. So they added 2 kind of, I think, for fairly significant options here. First one being that budgets adopted on or before December 31st of 2028. So for the next 3 years, reserve fund contributions can be paused or reduced for the purposes of funding repairs recommended by the milestone inspection. So again, they want to put the emphasis on taking care of the immediate structural safety items identified in the milestone inspection. And if that means pausing the reserve or pausing or reducing the reserve funding for the other items for a period of years, they felt that was a fair trade-off. And so then we ended up with this requirement. Now, we've seen gotten a number of questions in this area. The milestone inspection, I passed phase 1, but they said, we had some chipping paint and some caulk that was loose. So we had our maintenance guy do that. It cost us, let's say $500. Does that mean we can waive or pause all $500,000 of reserve funding? It's an interesting question. I don't think so. I don't think that was the intent of the law, but again, probably want to consult your attorney if you're considering, waiving or reducing more than what's recommended by the milestone inspection. Additionally, I had a case where the milestone inspection revealed some very significant expenses. The assessment happened, last year. They paid the assessments. They did all the work. They've got it done, and now they wanted a credit for that and be able to pause reserve contributions now. I think their attorney in that case said no, that you're not pausing, you're not funding the repairs. The repairs have already been funded, so that the budget this year, the 2026 budget, could not be reduced for that purpose. But that, again, kind of a specific case, but it raises some interesting questions there on what can institute or what would instigate the ability to pause or reduce reserve funding under that provision. They also included in the new statutes that a funding plan can incorporate regular assessments and special assessments, which we generally had been including before, loans as well. If there was a need for a loan right away for a project, that we would incorporate that as part of the funding plan. But they introduced now the idea of a line of credit to be approved. Now, and I should say both the pause above and the loan in this line does require approval of the majority of the voting interests to institute or take advantage of. But some communities now are looking at lines of credit, but it does say loans or lines of credit must be immediately available for use by the board. So you have to make sure that's approved not only by your owners, but likely by the bank before you can use that to offset any reserve funding. And any pauses or variation from the reserve funding plan does trigger the need for an updated SIRS. Moving on, then to the next slide. I think we kind of probably covered some of this already. The majority of the voting interest is required to partially fund or waive. That, remember, that used to be a majority of a quorum. Now it's a majority of the total voting interest. So if you have a 100-unit building, you need 51 votes, 51 of the voting interest to waive or partially reduce any reserve fund. You cannot waive or reduce any SIRS items, except for the milestone pause that we just talked about, or I guess the alternative funding sources, the loans or line of credit. Maybe you could say it would apply there, that's how you would get around funding the reserve items. And then there's the disclosures that need to be brought to everyone's attention on the financial statements, that waiver or reducing will result in owner liability for or it says may result in unit owner liability for payment of unanticipated special assessments regarding those items. The cost of the items don't go away. And that's one thing it's a little bit of a soapbox for me, but when people say the lawmakers created this issue, the law created these problems, the costs of the roofs, the cost of the concrete restoration were not created by the lawmakers. Those were inevitable costs that associations are going to face. What the lawmakers did is tried to bring that to attention and I addressed those by saving for them ahead of time instead of waiting until they were needed and then not having the money to do them. So, the cost, the inflation, the material labor rates, of course, those are all going to be kind of worldwide impacts that are causing those things to happen, and not something that's created by these SIRS laws, in my opinion. But moving then along to the next section here, as has been the case, whether you're a condo, HOA, or cooperative, this statute is included here. Reserves and any interest, including thereon, shall remain in the reserve accounts and can only be used for their authorized purposes unless they're used for another purposes approved by a vote of all the voting interests in the association. So I get a lot of questions, not just this time of year, but throughout the year, can we use reserves? Can we use reserves for this? Can we use reserves for that? It really depends on their intended purpose based on that requirement to answer that question. Talk a little bit about funding strategies. Again, this we're seeing kind of a variety of different providers use different approaches here. These are the 3 funding strategies identified in the National Reserve Study Standards, which are established by Community Associations Institute. Going from kind of least to most, baseline funding essentially calculates the reserve amount needed to keep the reserves from ever dropping into the red. Threshold funding calculates a reserve amount to keep the reserves above a minimum threshold. Something above $0 could be $1, could be $100,000, but some other threshold. And then full funding is essentially attaining and maintaining 100% of the fully funded balance. The fully funded balance is the current cost times the age divided by the remaining useful life. So real quick example, simple example, $100,000 roof, let's say, that has a 10-year life. Its fully funded balance in year 5 is going to be $50,000. Its fully funded balance in year 7 is going to be $70,000, and so on. And then so the fully funded balance for the association is going to be the fully funded balance of every item added together, and it's usually a very large number. So it's a much more conservative approach towards funding. So that I see that used very minimally to do the full funding amount, although we colloquially talk about fully funding our budget. Essentially, what we mean by that, I think, is different than what full funding is defined out in these national standards, in that the fully funding of the budget just means that we're not waiving or partially funding. We don't have to get a vote to do any partially funding, but baseline funding, which is the least conservative of these, is allowed by the statute and has been allowed by the administrative code, but now is codified right into the statute with House Bill 913. It says, the funding plan for the SIRS should, in fact, it requires the reserve study to show the baseline funding model. It can show other models, but at a minimum, it's requiring the baseline funding. The lawmakers, again, we're trying to say, we're not trying to create any additional burdens here than are absolutely minimum requirements to make sure that we've got money to keep us from, not having enough when the projects are needed. You can advance, Casey. I think the next one just says, yeah, the cost to fund is highest with full funding. The risk level is lowest with baseline funding. I'm sorry, the risk level is highest with baseline funding because there's really not much room for cushion. Quick case study here, just to show what I'm talking about. This first example is a community that we looked at. You'll see the blue bars here are the expenses over the next 30 years. The green bars, kind of the stable level of inflows, the contributions to the reserves over the next 30 years. And the purple line that looks like a little bit of mountain peak there is the balance. It's going to go up and down, but this is baseline funding in that it ends kind of, or it touches zero, kind of out towards the end of the study there. It goes all the way down to $0, and you can see in this particular case that required annual contribution per owner of $132, small community. The next slide is that same community using threshold funding. And here the board said, we don't have any reserves now, but we want to build it up and we want to make sure that we never drop. We don't want to go down to zero because we know that there can be an expense that might go over or something that might happen a little bit sooner. So we want to leave a threshold. In this case, they chose about $100,000. So we want to keep a threshold. We're going to do threshold funding. Minimum amount to keep the reserves at above 100,000. And in this case, you can see that increased their annual contribution by about $9 an owner. Conversely, on the full funding side, you can skip this slide, Casey. Sorry, this is just how full funding is calculated, but just wanted to show an example here again. Same association, but now you'll see the orange line, which is the percent funded, goes from zero initially up to 100%, kind of hovers at 100%. Goes over some years, under some years, but that's kind of the nature of percent funded as it jumps a little bit up and down. But you can see the balance required there, goes up over $1 million. And it's hard to justify that, I think, in most cases, especially a case like this where the expense profile, again, notice those blue bars at the bottom, you're never spending more than like $300,000 in 1 year. So my question would be, why would we need, or a question from your community, like, well, why do we need $1 million in the reserve account? Is there something very large happening in year 2054? Maybe. But in this case, that seems like a little bit of a more conservative. I would maybe say overfunding, and you can see the significant increase in the owner contributions there. I think we were at 132 initially, and now it's at 213. So increased quite a bit there to fund the fully funded amount. So I see some reserve studies say, well, pick 70% funded and get there, or pick 100, try to get to 100% funded. This one takes, many years to get to 100% funded. 20 plus years to get to 100% funded. Some I've even seen say, well, you have to be 100% funded within the next couple of years. And those kind of approaches just really are putting an exceptionally higher burden on near-term owners compared to those other two funding methods. So most of our associations use a threshold method. That's what I typically recommend. But baseline is also common and allowed by the statute. Pooled reserves are allowed just generally here. Again, the administrative code has kind of allowed these for years. It's codified this year. And it says the board can kind of decide to change the accounting method to pooling or a straight line account method without a vote of the owners. But I still think, personally, I think moving the funds may require a vote of the owners, but that's when you have to get your attorney on. Most associations are using pooled reserves now. The benefits of some flexibility and lower funding requirements. The drawback has always been, the bigger complaint with pooled reserves is that, the board could spend the money on something that's not needed. Well, pooled reserves still have to be listed of what the items are. You can only use the funds on those reserve items. And I think the controls that are put in place by the SIRS requirements mitigate some of the concerns that boards have had about, switching to pooled reserves. But there still are a few out there using the straight line, or also known as component method.
Matt, there's a couple questions that connect to what we're talking about now. Someone
Sure.
just said, threshold with pooling is what you generally suggest.
Yes.
Okay. And then someone also said the same amount of funding is needed to maintain SIRS items. So I don't understand how the threshold funding is less expensive than full funding. Please help me understand.
So hopefully that case study addresses that. It's really not, you're right. The expenses are the same. The expenses are the same either way. It's how much you would have in your bank account over the years that would change. And so having full funding means you've always got every bucket for every item there essentially is full throughout the course of the life of the cash flow, whereas threshold or baseline funding looks for a minimum amount and says how low can we take the combined bucket of all of these items and take that down to as low as we're comfortable with, whether that's zero or some other threshold. It's trying to identify a lower funding amount. So you're right, you're spending the same amount either way. It's whether you have more in the bank by calculating that funding goal of having more in the bank, having every bucket full, or just keeping your overall reserve above a certain amount. And probably the best way to show it, like I said, is through those case studies. That's why I include that in there. If you have a reserve study that you've done, that somebody's done for you, I just ask your reserve provider, hey, show me the two goals there, which one is which, and then you can see what the impacts are on your budget each year. We're hearing a bit of this, we got the SIRS done. I'm getting a lot of calls, this year saying, well, we got the SIRS done. We didn't agree with it, so we didn't share it. The board didn't like what they've heard, and so they didn't share it with the membership, but they don't consider it complete. I don't think that's gonna sail. I think that once the reserve provider, the engineer, whoever puts their stamp and seal on that report, it is their complete opinion. You certainly can get a second opinion. Most providers will give you have an option for an update or a revision. And in fact, there will be changes. That's kind of the nature of every SIRS, is that they're not necessarily static documents. Reserve studies are estimates, just like any estimate, need to be revisited from time to time. And there's certainly different opinions out there. I would just be cautious not to keep that information from the homeowners on these opinions that you're getting. This is not your fault, again, as a board member, that the costs are what they are, or that the useful lives are what they are. But if you don't agree with them or you have other information, bring that to the reserve provider. I always encourage you to go to your whoever did this study first, whether that's us or another firm. Take that information to them, ask them to make the changes, or ask them to at least explain why they won't make those changes, or why they have concerns, or why they made the recommendations that they did, so that you can be comfortable adopting that report. Or, like I said, if you feel like you need to get a second opinion because you don't like the answers that they're giving you, as well within your right. I will just caution you that the requirement, as we saw earlier, is that you're required to follow the most recent reserve study. So if the second opinion is worse or not in the direction you wanted it, then and we've had to go back. People have come back to us and said, well, we got a second opinion, but that was worse than yours, so we want to now adopt yours, and so we'd have to update ours now to make that the most recent report. But just some food for thought there. And then I think the last couple slides, I'm going to skip over these scenarios, Casey, because we're just short on time, so we'll just kind of can touch on those another time. But the last couple slides I think we have are just about updates. We can skip this one too, because I think these scenarios, again, sorry, I should have taken these out of here, but the scenarios are lengthy and probably for a longer session that we have. So let's keep going, because I want to get to some more questions. But before we do that, I want to talk about the update slides didn't make it in. So I just want to talk about updating it. We were just talking about that. The update is required every 10 years by the state for SIRS. Our national standards and best practices have always been to update on a 3-year cycle. But now there's a few pieces here that would trigger a need for an update sooner. One being that if the funding was paused, as we talked about, it would require an update. If the funding was, if you instituted a line of credit or a loan that wasn't part of the original funding plan, then that should be updated. And then essentially they said any budget that's adopted that does not follow the findings of the most recent SIRS, does not align with the most recent SIRS, then that would trigger the need for an update as well. So that's those are kind of the slides. Now let's jump in, and we have a QR code here. If you have feedback, we appreciate that. But I want to take some time here Oh, and thank you, Jeff, for putting the link in there. Because yeah, if you don't have your phone to click it, I've had that problem before too. I can't click a QR code. So thank you, Jeff, for putting the link in there for that. But I know we have a bunch of questions, so let me buzz through those kind of in a lightning round here in our last few minutes. Joan, I'm sorry, I'm going to start right at the top here. So, Christopher, compliance with 718 is one thing, enforcement is another. Are there any real mechanisms in place to determine if a COA is following the financial and inspection recommendations of the SIRS? Well, it is, there obviously there's now the database that shows if you've done the SIRS, whether you're following it or not is going to take an informed owner or someone that has a copy of the budget to compare it to the SIRS. And again, a bank, a mortgage company is going to ask for, I would assume they're asking for a copy of the budget and a copy of the SIRS when they're approving mortgages there. So that could certainly impact your ability to sell units. And the division can investigate any, and they do. They get complaints and they investigate and they would look at that and enforce that for you. So, encourage you to follow it. I know there'll be boards that won't. I know that there'll be boards that kind of assume they'll get away with it, and they probably will get away with it for a while, but at some point that will catch up to communities, and it's not it is not where you'd want to be as a board member. You don't get paid enough to take on that liability or to do things wrong. So and I know most of you are on this webinar so that you're doing it right. So that hopefully that answers your question there. Guillermo asks, how can we accomplish this adjustment each year? I'm not sure I followed that question, so I'm going to skip. Joan asks, when might lanai screens be included in structural items? Joan, this would be when typically if the lanai is directly supported into the structural slabs. So if the balconies, if the lanai connections and when you say screens, I'm assuming you're meaning the screen frames. The screen mesh itself, I would say probably would not be a structural item, but I could see the screen frames be included in the structural items just because a failure to address them might it might have a deleterious effect on the balcony slab or the lanai slab that is a structural component of the building. The next question, do you have a sample affidavit that you can share? Yes, I do. And I'll share. Casey, can you put maybe your my email in the chat if people want to email us? And I think there's an option on that QR code too to request more information. But if you have a question, you want a copy of the information that we shared, or a sample affidavit or sample report, happy to send one out. Like I said, I know the state DBPR, I've been working with them on a task force as well that's got an affidavit that they'll be releasing soon as well that can be used. So thanks for that question, Karen. Joan asks, can the online account be viewed by the board and unit owners after it's created? Our manager created the account and we'd like to view it. No, I think you can see that it's been submitted on that database, Joan, but the online account, and the question is here, I think about the online account on the DBPR's page, you'd have to have your username and password to view the account and to view all the information that's attached there. So if you have that, your manager should have if the manager created the account, they should have the username and password so you can go in to see the account for the association. Marcia asked, how do we access the blacklist? Great question. We'd love for Fannie Mae to be transparent about this list, but unfortunately they are not. It is not something that is publicly available at this time. And the next question too, how do you know if your condo's on the blacklist and what we do to address the concerns that got us there? You would have to reach out directly to that. I think they did create a questionnaire where you can ask if your specific community is on the blacklist, but there's no central list of communities on the blacklist. Though I do know, I have been told at least that there's over 5,000 communities throughout the U.S. on that blacklist. There are firms out there that are helping get you off if there's something on there. There's a firm that can help you remediate the concerns that are on there. Sometimes it stemmed from crazy things like just a questionnaire was filled out incorrectly and on a mortgage application, and all of a sudden the community found themselves on the blacklist. So So that's kind of the blacklist questions that I see on here. Guillermo, I do not believe a financial institution would lend money to fund reserves. Um, we'll see. We'll see there, I think there are some that are out there offering this line of credit. I know there's some that have put up a product to essentially offset the reserves with a line of credit. There are many financial institutions that are lending for projects. So if there's a reserves for a project identified, um, then then it would be, something that they would be interested in. So I talk with your financial institution there. Um, let's see. Does the HB 913 pause or reduction of the SIRS apply after a recertification? I don't believe so. I think the pause says the pause is for the purpose of funding repairs identified by the milestone inspection. So if I'm reading that as a specifically, then I would say no, that doesn't apply. But that's a good question for your attorney to answer. Another question: if a $500 milestone inspection and repairs are completed, doesn't the HB provision require the pause and SIRS funding to cease when the milestone inspections are completed? I don't. That's again probably going to take an interpretation of the law, not something we're doing here today. Barry, thank you. When a COA waives contributions, can that affect calculated remaining useful life due to deferred maintenance replacement that is delayed? Deterioration and wear continue no matter how much money is being collected. I would agree with the second part of that question, Christopher. When a COA waives contributions, can that affect the remaining useful life due to repair maintenance? When waive the contributions, I think that's your point here. Waiving the contributions, waiving the funding, waiving the inflows to your reserves does not do anything for the physical property, and it does not extend useful lives for items. That's just some associations would like to believe that, and they'll go in the budget and they'll manipulate the remaining useful life to reduce the funding amount. But when you waive the contributions, no, that does not impact the funding needs. In fact, what that typically does is it increases the future funding needs because you're 1 year less. Think of it like a retirement account. If you didn't fund your retirement account for 1 year, there's going to be that much less in your retirement account that's going to have to be made up. Any savings account, you could look at it the same way. So no, I think that's your point. That deterioration wear will continue no matter how much money is being collected, and I think that's an important concept here that everyone should take away, is that our buildings, our facilities, our communities that we live in are going to require maintenance. They're going to require repairs. They're going to require money to do those items, and whether you collect the money or not, the need doesn't go away. In fact, not having the money often results in my experience, projects getting deferred or delayed and costing more over time. So it's kind of the counter effect of boards saying, well, I want to be the hero and save my association money by not requiring them to spend all this money on reserves that we're not going to see the benefit of. Well, when it comes time for that project and there's no money there, what usually happens is that you cost your association more money because the project got more expensive as it got deferred and delayed. And by the way, we didn't earn any interest on those reserves that we could have been collecting and earning interest on the whole time. So just not an ideal way to run the association, but great point and great question here. If the SIRS is done by December 31st, 2025, when does funding have to start? Funding has to start on any budget adopted after December 31st of 2024. So the funding already has to start, which again is kind of a bit of a loophole. Marion's question there, I touched on that earlier. I'm not sure what you base your 2025 budget on if you don't have the SIRS in place. I would, again, probably consult your professionals there and at least come up with your best. My advice would be come up with your best estimate for all of those structural items and make sure that you're funding those right away in the 2025 budget. That can't be delayed any longer unless one of those other conditions applied. Thanks for the question. Alberto, question here, kind of a longer one here, I think. Just more words at least. Association, we're up on time, so let's let's see. I'm happy to stick around if people want to. I think we can certainly let people go if they've stayed on for their allotted time for the CEUs. Again, want to thank on behalf of Casey and myself and the whole team here. Mariel, do you want to put some closing statements, and then we can come back to questions? But I want to let people go that have done their hour of time that we're
Perfect.
promised to do.
Yeah, no, that's perfect, Matt. Absolutely. So, thank you guys all for joining us. And if anybody does have to head out, please do so. Yeah, no, we want to say thank you. What an amazing presentation. So much great information. That's why we have so many great questions. And I'll let you get back to it. I